ghostly mark. Cobwebs twine and shadows dance in this twilight somber trance. Candles flicker, weary wicks, ancient echoes, time's cruel tricks. Marble figures, frozen pose, amidst the silent sorrow grows. Whispering shadows, secrets keep in the depths where night meets sleep. Underneath the velvet gloom, guardians of the haunted room. Chandeliers in crystal tears reflect forgotten yesteryears, softly chanting distant cries. Through the arches sorrow sighs. Gargoyles watch with stony gaze, guardians of endless maze. Pipe organ's breath begins to rise, filling air with mournful ties. Whispering shadows, secrets keep in the depths where night meets sleep. Underneath the velvet gloom, guardians of the haunted room.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I've done this right, we should all be looking at a wonderful crab mech and making a start to our weekend with more writing and Shoal. I'm going to presume everything's working the way that it should be. And hi, lovely to see the usual suspects here. This is Lady Red of the Black Pants Legion, and we're going to do some wittering and nonsense again. And with any luck, Aiden will be joining us shortly. How are we doing today, chat? He's really good. Benny needs pets. Benny definitely needs pets. He is a good boy and causes many mischiefs. Pretty good. You went for a walk, Greenmost? Wonderful. Did you take any pupper friends with you? Benny, our precious boy. Benny is the precious boy. And I only included a little bit of the write-up we did for him last week. And he's still a sketch at the moment. I've started putting proper line work on some of his limbs, but he's not finished yet. And we're going to have a little discussion about him and some extra things I think we need to add on to what I've done. So we will definitely have a chat over that. Load is waiting on a package. Ooh, I hope it's something exciting. Yes, it would help if I got into the voice channel on Discord so that Aiden can come and join us. So I'm going to go and do that, which shouldn't change my audio, but should change Aiden's. Let's see.
Hello.
Is OBS picking up?
Is OBS picking? Yeah, it looks like it.
Everything's green, which is what we like to see. How are you doing today, Aiden?
I'm doing all right. Got my legs clawed up because the babies were attempting to hamstring me to bring me down to their level after a grocery store run. They knew I had meat and they wanted, or more accurately, they just wanted cuddles and love. So.
I did take them out for some outside time while you were at the store, so hopefully they're going to behave themselves this stream, but we will see.
We will see.
Oh, packages a new mouse. That's very, very nice. Whereas Samurai has IKEA cabinets to put together. I wish you many luck and spare Allen keys. Crab people, yes, yes. So I'm going to be completely upfront. I have no direct plan for this week. We're just going to kind of wing it as we go. We've got some things from last week to talk about. We'll do some more world building a bit later on. But I don't have a specific topic I wanted to go off on this week, unlike previous ones. So I'll probably throw it over to you, chat, for anything that you'd like to talk about this week. We will see where we go from there. We'll start, though, with Benny. For those of you who were here last week, which I think is probably most of you that are here now, last week was a bit of a special one. We did a little bit of a memorial for a sadly departed friend and Orkslander, where we talked about all of the wonderful stories we had with Benny, all of the things he got us involved in or was involved in with us in TTRPGs. Which I personally feel are a fantastic storytelling medium, as communal storytelling is my favourite kind. So we reminisced a lot about Benny, and then we decided that we were going to immortalise him as a mech in the Shoal setting. And we did a wonderful write-up about him. We took some names from things that we knew he was involved in. We built in a lot of his very cheeky personality. And I did send you all home with some homework to do cheeky things over the weekend and cause some shenanigans. So if anybody caused a shenanigan, please let me know about it in chat. I'd love to know what you got up to.
Wait, why am I the plan? No, Varathrogna, I am not a plan. I barely am capable of planning.
You tried, Grimos? If you spent time with puppers, that counts. And I'm certain you spent time with puppers. Puppers are always shenanigans. So this week I have been working on finishing my last major commission before we go off on our grand tour of the country to move back home. And I had enough time to at least get down a sketch of an idea of what I thought Benny should look like. So we are looking at a rough here. It's a refined rough, but it's still a rough. I wanted to have the sort of crab elements built into it, as we know that a hermit crab is going to be inside the cockpit on this thing because reasons. One of the things that I think Benny still needs is I think he needs something on like his back carapace. Possibly we need a version with tiny hermit crab Benny on one of the claws having popped out of the cockpit to come and say hi. And I also feel like he's going to need some coral that's exposed to the open water. I feel like that should be a thing that we maybe have with our Titans, is that they do benefit from coral exposure. But obviously very, very willing to hear what you guys think. Tiny carapace crab rave. We could put a crab rave on his back. There's going to be some major shenanigans, but I had to wait for this next week because I want Cookie to take part. That sounds wonderful, Whirlin, and I very much look forward to hearing about the shenanigans. I want a Benny miniature now. We need to get Parallax on this. When I was first... So, Parallax was part of Task Force Delta Crayon that bullied me into streaming in the first place. And one of the conversations that I did have was that if we went ahead with doing what I was planning on doing, if you guys were interested in it, and this ended up being a viable stream slot, which it seems to have become, that I might have some things for him to design and make STLs for. So Parallax is aware that this might at some point become a thing, and I think once we get Benny's final design nailed down, I will be positing it to him and batting my eyelashes and asking very nicely if he feels like cracking open Blender and seeing what he can make. Benny plushies, I don't know where we'd get those made, but they would be adorable. It looks more artificial than I expected, but it makes sense. The tech is on the outside. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do for how I was visualizing Benny in my head, I definitely want to put some coral on the outside. As I say, this is just a rough. There's a lot of space to put more detail on. But we talked about the Furin being an early mech. We know we've got a hermit crab inside it, and maybe one of the reasons the hermit crab was even interested in this thing in the first place is because it has crab-like features, which got me thinking about our ceratinoids that we designed. We know this thing is 4 times bigger than a deep dweller ceratinoid, so I kind of had all of those elements in my head. And as an earlier mech, I figured it would be something that was sort of quite industrial looking, quite sort of large and clunky. And I wanted it to be a strong looking mech that was quite sort of bulky and robust, because we know Benny goes off and does Benny things all on his own without having a dedicated maintenance team. So I wanted it to look quite solid and, you know, sort of robust and able to weather the ocean that Benny lives in without needing the Shoaly people to get involved too often, and so that he was more than robust enough to cause some chaos. So that's where the design ideas I had came from. I also wanted to put on the front, you've got the 2 sort of cables dropping down there. Maybe those were going to be coral sensors or something. I hadn't decided yet. Hermit Crab Rave requires the funny hat contest. Who can bring the silliest shell? Beer cans, traffic cones, doll heads. I mean, traffic cones would be very BPL adjacent and correct. So, yes, I do think we need that. Live anemones, whatever you could imagine, would be found on the ocean floor. That sounds wonderful. I appreciate that Benny has 2 different types of claws like a lobster. Yeah, again, I was trying to sort of think about the practicalities. We knew the Furin was going to be an older, very practical kind of mech. So having sort of 1 rotation of claw for picking things up and another one that could maybe dig, I thought sounded quite sensible. Will says it looks badass. Also would be easy to print without the easily breakable narrow parts. Yeah, if we're going to make minis of these, then certainly that will always be something to keep in mind. I think some of its robustness is ablative mass. Absolutely, yes, and that would certainly make sense, I think, in many ways as well. One of the things I haven't sort of figured out yet is this thing is 4 times the size of a deep dweller ceratinoid, but I haven't actually checked that the cockpit is currently big enough for a ceratinoid to fit in. So I might need to have a little tinker with the face a bit, but we'll think about that later. Or maybe where the optics are or how they work. So this was what I did in the time that I had this week, and it does seem like you guys like it, which I'm very pleased about. The conch pit. That might work really well, actually, is to talk about it in those terms, because conches do echo things well, and that's in building and keeping with our concept of sort of musical terms and songs and audio stuff being a part of the setting. The ceratinoid could lie down in the cockpit. Yeah, and we also talked about, for some ceratinoids, operating a Titan being a sort of transcendent skull beyond needing to keep changing your shell. So we know ceratinoids have these big heavy shells. They could actually be smaller underneath. Why no pup cam? Because we no longer have a pup enclosure. The puppies are now big enough. They have free roam of the house. What I might ask Aiden to do if they settle down for a nap is to see if they're in a region where we can get a camera on them. We might try and get a pup cam before the end of stream. But if we don't, then by next week what I'm hoping to have is to have a nice slideshow so you can see all of the pups. All of the photos we've taken of them with their time with us. We know that Lupa will be leaving us soon. She is not leaving us this Sunday, but she is leaving us next Sunday. So we are coming to the end of our time with her as well, which will be happy and sad at the same time.
The other thing to keep in mind about why no pup cam, because no pup pen, is because the pup pen has now been repurposed as a medical ward because Pip on Monday had his bits snipped and has been needed to have a shelter where he can escape the babies. Also where we can contain him when he tries to get too rambunctious and run around, because he's got 4 staples, bless him, and we don't want him to do himself a harm.
Yes, it is now a pip pen rather than a pup pen, but don't worry too much, Will. For other than the first day when he was a bit tender, you wouldn't know that there was anything wrong with him or he'd had a procedure. He thinks he's completely fine, and he's not completely fine, so we have to keep calming him down. He's been a very good boy about not fussing at his wound, but a very bad boy about acting like he has a wound. So Pip's fine. Pip is absolutely fine.
He just doesn't realize that he can't run and jump and play and do other Pip things.
Yes. Anka has opinions about this. Pip is currently on my hip, Wilf. He's out of his pen at the moment, so I will give him pets, and from you as well, Chocobo. Load says, so there's this ongoing alternate history story I've been reading called Stupid Luck and Happenstance. Point of divergence is relatively minor but rather impactful. Two POV characters avoid death during the first week of the Battle of Verdun, which leads to the assault of Fort Souville being delayed 24 hours. That's the sort of alternate history story that I really enjoy. I don't like ones that sort of go for the sort of big picture stuff where, what if the Nazis won or whatever? But stuff where like a tiny little thing has knock-on effects that you can sort of follow through, where the focus is the tiny little thing and then it grows from there. I always find those more compelling. So that sounds like a really interesting story.
You like butterfly effect stories.
I do like butterfly effect stories, yes. So if the pup pen has become a pip pen, if Iden is infirm, will it become a pop pen? Potentially. Depends on how much he's annoying me with his coughing.
That sounds ominous, and I don't know if I like it very much.
Shouldn't. Okay, I'm going to take Benny down for the moment. We can bring him back up later if we want to have a further talk about it. Definitely, I want to put some coral on the outside of his armor, a bit more detail, and just sort of make him look a bit more visually interesting. But that's the base that I have, and it seems you guys are on board with that, which I'm really glad about. So let us turn off Benny for now. There we go. And then we have our main screen. So as I said, I don't have a plan for this week. There was nothing in specific that I wanted to rant and rave about, although there's always topics I can go off on. I would like this week to really talk about the coral, because one of the things that we've got going on is we obviously have the Shoal section over in the auxiliary Discord, and there's a ton that goes on there every week, which makes me immeasurably happy. Oh, I now have a anchor on my lap. Hello. Oh, God, and there's Looper as well. We now have all of the puppies.
Yes, unfortunately, I need you to hold them.
You need me to hold the puppies? Okay, you take the adults out. I got the babies. So a lot of what's going on over in the Orcs that people are interested in, that I'm definitely on board with, is lots of things talking about culture, humanity in the setting, music, all of that sort of thing. And I feel like there's just two sections we really need to put some focus onto before we move on to fleshing these cultures out, which is where a lot of the interest is at the minute. I think we need to talk about technology, what Shoaly technology looks like, and I'd like to do that next week, and also sort of pinning down coral psionics and what sort of abilities we want psionics to have. So I'm hoping this week to talk about coral a little bit, and we can start with that at whatever point we want to. But if there's any writing topics you guys would like to talk about first, very on board for following anything you're interested in, chat. I've been writing since I was 12 years old, which was some time ago. We're not going to talk about my exact age, but it wasn't exactly yesterday. So I've been writing for a long time, particularly communal writing. I'd like to think I know a fair bit about it for somebody who never went to university. Whole years ago, I wish, Wilf, my joints wish that was only 10 years ago. Sound is off. I can turn on some background music. Thank you for letting me know. Boop. That should fix that. Oh, God, Rail's here, and he's here to talk about otters. Has something specific been going on with otters with you, Rail, or do we need to talk about the book The Tarka Trail and the movie? Because I can do that. I may have drawn an entire mech, and sound is now back. Okay, good. I didn't actually change any settings. I don't know what happened there. I've wondered how our special ingredient coral works in the story. We will just definitely have to look at that today, I think, Tired German, and start pinning some of that down. I also have another piece of art from Tired German to look at, which we will look at when we shift over to world building. Nothing in particular, just one of my favourite animals. Otters are a wonderful animal, and you'll be pleased to know that we do have otters on Shoal, Rail, or at least otter-adjacent creatures. Rail comes to us from Otter Space. Oh no! Beavers, otters, and bears. Redwall battle otters. Redwall is such a good series for how it characterized things. One of the things that can really be a detriment to writing is when you use races, an entire race or species, to categorize a certain mental trope. But when you're writing for a slightly younger audience, and when you use it in such a consistent and clever way as Brian Jacques did with Redwall, it can be a real benefit to a setting. I don't think it's something that we'd carry over into Shoal, but there's definitely something to be said for the strength of character you always had in Redwall's otters, the wonderful Imperial British Army rabbits, the Forge Master badgers, intrepid mice characters.
The coal miner moles.
Yep, yeah, there was a lot of really good tropes by species built into Redwall, but each character that you met in each book that was part of one of these tropes were unique enough that it made it very, very compelling and interesting. And of course, all of the descriptions of food is amazing.
That dude wrote food porn like nobody else. Holy
yeah,
crap.
especially when he was describing things that as a human you can't eat.
Indeed.
Wilf says, I like the idea of making the psionics very music-based, so it's a matter of joining the chorus and guiding the song. Yes, yeah, that's one of the things I've been exposed to 40k, as most people are, if you happen to have a pulse and the ability to breathe. And 40k was something I really enjoyed, not including sort of the last decade. And the concept of the Eldar singers with the Wraithbone was something that always struck me as a neat idea, and there's definitely a little bit of that. I like this idea in my vision of Shoal that you guys have all been contributing to and changing and warping in the best way possible. So I think we'll definitely have some of that. I've been giving all the creatures that use coral a sort of monthly coral use. That has been the 4th consumption value that I keep posting. That's really awesome. I'll admit I have not paid enough attention to that, but once we get to the point where we're sort of plugging these details into the compendium, that's definitely the sort of thing to put on there. And it would sort of be, because I know we were talking about pearls at one point and froth and illnesses that can come as a result of coral use. So building in that sort of limiter of how much psionic nonsense can people get up to before it starts having negative effects will definitely be an interesting thing to look at. And I know that our wonderful Ed Gauss, who's probably in chat right now, has been writing up a lot to do with humans, and there's a section in his proposals and thoughts and brain splurging onto paper that looks at the effects of psionics on humanity. Hi, Ed. It's lovely to see you here. I have read over the thing that you have, and we are going to talk about that this week as well. Rail says, I never read Redwall. That was about the time I discovered Dresden Files. If you ever just want some light reading where you're willing to read something that's aimed at a younger audience than, you currently are, you can't go wrong with Redwall. It's very cozy reading, and I think you'd really enjoy the otters. The otters in Redwall are really, really well done.
Redwall has also been inspiration for at least a handful of different tabletop, D&D encounters and environments that I've run. It's really good for that kind of fantasy inspiration. Looking at it, for example, I was telling the story the other week about the TTRPG shenanigans where Lady Red and her damn kobold were doing all of the antics to entirely upset all my well-laid plans. The goblin ambush from the trees was based off of, let me see if I remember the correct book. I think it was Matameo. There was a section where the slavers that are the bad guys that kidnapped the children from Redwall had to race through a forest because of a similar ambush.
Didn't get resolved in quite the same way, though, in the Redwall books.
No. That said, if you don't have an idea for a topic, I have one.
what would you like to talk about this week before we do massive world building nonsense?
So, we've touched on it previously when we were discussing Monster Hunter, but the importance of character agency and competence for major characters in a story. Because when you look at it, depending on the story kind of dictates how competent or how, capable you want your characters, both protagonist and antagonist, to be. Because, like, let's say you're trying to do some kind of serious fiction, like we're talking about, say, a story that is we'll put it in the context of Shoal, one of the first expeditions to land, or the space flight, you would expect the characters to all be fairly confident and competent in what they're doing. Flip side, you get something like Scooby-Doo, where they're all idiots, but that's part of the fun. Or a Saturday morning cartoon where you've got Skeletor's a bumbling idiot for the laughs. And just kind of, once again, touching on how you have to have that intersection of character and context, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Context between what kind of story you're trying to write, what kind of audience you're shooting for.
So the last part is sort of the linchpin of everything that you've just said there, which is audience. And yeah, this is definitely something I can have a rant and a ramble about. So when you're writing, there's sort of two types of people for writing a story of any kind in any medium. You have your planners and your pantsers. Planners plan everything out ahead of time, and what we are doing with this stream slot is planning to the nth degree. Even most planners would not necessarily go to the depths we're going with Shoal. And then you have your pantsers, who just fly by the seat of their pants and do what feels right in the narrative as they go. I do not understand pantsers because I cannot work that way, but both planners and pantsers are both united in a single facet that will make their book good regardless of how they approach it, or their story in whatever narrative medium that it's in. And that is having respect for your audience and what it is that you're here trying to do. And that's really where a story has to start from, is what is the message and theme and goal of what you are sitting down to write. Now, some writing, if it's just for yourself because you just want to get some ideas onto paper, you're just doing something for fun, just something to entertain you, you don't have to have any of that in it. But the moment that you're asking for people's money or time or attention, you kind of have a certain degree of a contract to the end user that you're expecting to engage with your work. And it's from that you then have to start thinking about all of the complex elements of writing that I really like to talk about on this stream, which includes your character motivations, their character arcs, the story progression, what your inciting incident is going to be, what the journey is going to be from where things start to where things end, and what the message is that you're carrying through that, which affects who your characters need to be to carry that through, or vice versa. If the real focus is on, I want to really focus on how this specific character reacts to the events I put in front of them, then you're going to build the story around the character and their development. This would be if you've got, say, a story where you want to explore potentially trauma and people's reactions to it and how they heal from it, or how their outlook changes. The character becomes the driving force of the story, and you'll put events in front of them to allow you to show this character's breadth of emotion and development. Whereas you can also do it the other way around, which is more common and is what I tend to do, which is this is the series of events I want characters to go through to carry the overarching message that I'm bringing everybody here for. So the first thing you have to consider is, what is my message and how am I best going to get that across? And in Scooby-Doo, your message, you're basically there to entertain children with the concept of a mystery to be solved, with relatable characters to their age range who aren't going to be too advanced or saying anything that's too overcomplicated. And it's there to be casual entertainment in the background. You're not trying to teach anything, you're not trying to impart some grand life-changing message. You're giving these sort of character archetype tropes, something for children to laugh at and be able to engage with at a child's understanding level. And of course, the formula for Scooby-Doo was so good that it was replicated into a bajillion different sort of spin-offs that are basically exactly the same show but with different characters. Where you've got your Sharky and Jaws, Captain Caveman, you had all the different ones that's exactly the same premise, just different characters. The characters don't really matter in that kind of storytelling. On the other end of the scale, to use what you were talking about, if you were doing a story about the very first mission into space to land on the moon, obviously that's something that we've actually done, so we've got some reality to draw from, which can help. But even if you were doing it with speculative, you'd be looking at, well, these characters are going to need to be much more intellectually advanced. This is a story for an older audience. And then you have to make the decision of, what is it that I'm trying to impart to the audience? Is this going to be about the indomitable human spirit to adventure? And at that point, are you going to build in all of these mishaps into the story, and it isn't about the characters' intellectual levels beyond the fact that they will need those to solve the problems to show that humanity will always try to overcome? Is this a story where you want to look at the fragility of human life? Is this a story where you want to look at the efforts that highly intellectual and well-trained people and physically capable people go through to even be able to go on that mission? Which is, going to put your focus a lot into sort of the pre-gaming of going to space to land on the moon, with the climax being actually getting there. Whereas with your human spirit to overcome, you might get there quite early in the story, and then bad things happen, and it's how you're getting back. Quite often, your characters and their competence will serve the message and the story that you're trying to carry through, unless the character is the driving force, at which point you need to really understand the arc and the mentality of the character that you're playing with, and then adjust your series of events to allow that character to shine and show what it is you're trying to deliver to the audience. And I think that's where you see a lot of shows that get it wrong go wrong, is that they don't have that connectivity of intent. So you'll get shows where you have this is where you get things like your Mary Sues and your MacGuffins and all of those sort of tropes, where, okay, I want this thing to happen, but I haven't really thought this through, and my character hasn't had any of the development to date that would allow them to overcome this problem, so now I need a contrivance of either the character or some new item or some new person turns up to solve this problem, because I haven't really thought through how I'm delivering this message.
It would help if I was actually transmitting. Wow.
I only just realised you weren't. Would you like to start that over again?
I am dumb. Okay. Cool. So, I guess to segue, because my original thought process for bringing the subject up is kind of what kind of stories need what kind of characters. Like the man mission to the moon is all about very capable, competent ones. You get, for example, a slasher movie or, a horror story where the protagonist not being competent or capable is part of the story because they're way in over their heads. At what point, what kinds of story would you say are character agnostic? As in, you can have the majority of the spectrum of what a character is capable of and how they behave, and it's still kind of working in the general vein of that story type.
Okay, that's that. I'm not sure I'm entirely following what you're asking, but um, if you don't need to go into depths with your characters and you're not looking for huge character complexity, you'll see that a lot in younger media aimed at younger people. You already hit on slasher stories, where quite often the characters don't need to be particularly fleshed out. It's also sort of anything that relies on tropes and cliches as well. We see it a lot in video games. You get very tropish characters, and I think the importance and the difference comes in once again, we're talking about your audience and the message you want to deliver. Is this just cheap entertainment for younger audiences or something to have on in the background? Fine, carry on. That's completely viable. Not everything needs to be a deep introspection on the complexities of the human condition, although I do feel that all stories help us to reflect on the human condition, even the bad ones. But that's different to when you're using character shorthand. For secondary characters who maybe aren't that important, they might have a sort of tropish personality type. We see that a lot, as I was saying, in video games. It's where things like star charts and blood types and the like come in. It's all shorthand for this is this kind of character. Digging into this isn't that important. That's not what we're here for. We're here to serve what we're up to.
Yeah. I guess to give it a bit better, to try and give it a bit better context of what it is I'm asking, I mostly for writing come from the perspective and background of tabletop RPGs, because that's what I'm most familiar with as far as, actually creating stories. And in those, as a GM, your big thing is you're not so much creating characters as you're creating the setting, because the main characters are your players, and the characters are entirely of their creation. So the story that you're trying to create, largely from your perspective as a writer, it has to be character agnostic.
Okay, so you're talking about something being character independent, and
at what point? So yeah, I guess because my background is in TTRPGs and making that comment, you also see it in like RPGs in video games, because the player character has to be a blank slate. But when you move to less interactive and more standard fiction and writing, would there be a case to be made for a story where it really doesn't matter what sort of character you plug in there as an author? What kind of genre would that be?
So it wouldn't be a genre. I wouldn't call it a genre thing, but I would call it a sort of a theme thing that you're going with. The thing with all stories, if they're going to be interesting stories, is something has to change over the course of the story. Typically, with most stories, that's going to be character arcs. You're going to have a character who starts in one place, an inciting incident happens, they go through a whole series of events and emotional and intellectual changes to the point where you get to a resolution at the end, and the character has changed by going through that. When you're having a character-independent story that you're trying to write, like for TTRPGs, you can't depend on the characters, because like you said, you're going to be taking player characters through something potentially. You can't guarantee what they're going to do if you're not going to just make this on rails or dictate to people, which is anathema to the point of communal storytelling. So what you need to have there is that your setting is going to change, and you make your world the character, or the events in the world are the character. Now, you're talking about TTRPGs particularly here because it's what you're most versed in, and I was blessed to play in your Pathfinder game that you ran for the longest time. And what you did really well with that was that you had a series of regions that you had a good idea, and you treated the regions as characters. This region has these things in it, this is what's happened historically, and this is what's currently going on and changing in that region. And then you had politics that sort of went between the certain areas, and you knew that you were going to use your secondary characters in the Civil War arc to give us things to interact with. And those characters and that changing political climate was something that you had the ability to pre-plan and have a handle on, and although our actions would affect it, that was your character arc, was the arc of the politics of what was going on in the land, at which point we could plug in any character we wanted to make to have to interact with those challenges and problems. You just had to cope with the fact that we were going to adjust how those changes and problems might play out, and potentially, change some of the impact of that, because that's the beauty of communal storytelling, is the fact that you are allowing other people to have an impact on the narrative. And it's also why it's really important that if your GM says, look, I need a week off to figure this out because you just did one full Henderson to my plans, you need to go, that's fine, can we buy you a pizza?
Yeah, stumping the GM badly enough generally is grounds for, hey, can we at least get you a Coke or I don't know, a pizza, buy you a sub sandwich? Cause man, brain meat scrombulate.
Raiders of the Lost Ark is character agnostic argument. I mean, you could throw anybody through the events that happened in Raiders of the Lost Ark, because the events don't necessarily happen because the character causes the inciting incident. There's a lot going on there, but the argument to be had there is, how different would the lens be if you were observing it through anybody other than Indiana Jones, because he does have a character. And, that's where you're then sort of playing things off together. Dinner Henderson is a reference I didn't expect today. Yeah, Aiden and I are somewhat entrenched in old internet and memery. Tired German brought up another thing where he was reading a book that had far too many characters in it, 47 characters in a story. That is another worthy thing to bring up, is the sort of opposite end of what Aiden's talking about, where the character doesn't matter. You could put anybody in and the story would still happen and it could still be interesting. At the opposite end of the scale, if you try to put in too many characters where understanding them is important, you're going to have... It's just going to get muddy. You can't keep track of it. It's okay to use tropes and to write characters down to their bare minimum when they're not the central character.
I mean, at that point, you have a case of the characters don't matter, but for the wrong reason, because if you've got so many characters going on that you can't really keep track of them all, then no, they don't matter. Because why do I care? I have no idea what the fuck's going on.
You can't keep track of it. Tropes are just tools. It's how you use them that matters. Absolutely. Tropes are not this evil thing. There is a current sort of feeling, especially among younger writers, that you can't use tropes, you mustn't ever use a cliche. That's incorrect. All the things that come from writing are tools in a writer's arsenal, and there are times where you want to use certain tools. Even Mary Sue's can be a tool that is of use to a writer if used correctly. But what you have to remember is that a Mary Sue is a sledgehammer. There are only certain problems that require a sledgehammer. Most problems are not going to require something that huge and heavy, and you're not going to need to make a point that obvious. But there are times where a sledgehammer is appropriate.
You just gave me an unlocked memory right there, because talking about sometimes the Mary Sue is a helpful thing. Of all the things you just brought to my brain meat, Spy Kids 3D, when they had what was the Frodo actor? Elijah Wood? They have him show up and he's the frickin' I'm the guy, and then he gets Worf affected less than 5 minutes later. And it very much is, they've built the Mary Sue character up so much throughout the movie that they then proceed to just, murder him within 5 minutes of his arrival.
The Mary Sue sledgehammer is excellent for comedy, yes. That is where it is most appropriately used. But you have the ability to take a trope and subvert it. You have the ability to use a trope appropriately because it's well understood narrative shorthand. Same with cliches and etc. Over reliance on any one tool in the writing arsenal is like putting far too much seasoning into whatever it is that you're cooking. You have to use things appropriately, but at no point should anything be completely written out. Adverbs as well. Apparently adverbs are the devil, and I completely disagree. If your writing is just adverb, 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 then yeah, it's going to come across as very amateur, very juvenile writing. But the right adverb in the right place to contextualize something can be fantastic. And of course, adverbs are fantastic to use when you're writing dialogue, because people don't talk how people write. When you're trying to write something professional or to deliver a message or something engaging or entertaining, you're going to use your words with a lot more modulation, a lot more intellectual, many more $20 words are likely to come out, and you're going to pace those words because you've got the time to think about it, because you're writing them down, you're making something constructive. In the moment when you're talking to somebody, though, you're not going to be pulling out those big words and that fluid manner of speech. Some people can do it, some people do it regularly, but that's not the norm. You're much more likely to catch little stutters or people interrupt each other. Adverbs are much more common in dialogue, and that can make people seem more real and for your dialogue not to seem so wooden and stiff. Emotions come into dialogue as well, especially if you're writing a dramatic scene. I mean, for example, if you're writing a scene where a character's getting arrested outside a bar fight or something, there's going to be a lot of high emotions going on there. Sentences are going to get cut off. People are going to be using very different words to the words that you're using to write the descriptive parts of your book. So there is literally no tool in a writer's arsenal that should never be used. All tools are viable. You just have to use them correctly. Salt is a great seasoning, but too much ruins the dish. Yes, though I am all for people writing the saltiest, edgelordiest stuff that they want to for themselves. That can be very cathartic. I recall a writer wrote a list of rules for writing and ended them up with, and break any of these rules before you write anything monstrous. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's one of the things that I really struggled with when I decided I wanted to start getting into writing in a bit more depth, which was about 7 years ago now, 6-7 years, when I first started writing down all of my concepts for my own personal setting that has been sadly neglected of late, but that's fine. I wanted to go and do a lot of research because I don't necessarily always believe in the education system when it comes to the arts, and that is not to put any kind of dampener or negative impact or inference on anyone who's gone to school for those things. Absolutely, you are going to learn interesting things by going to a accredited college or school for the arts. I don't always see, though, that they necessarily keep up with how arts are evolving. How humanity is currently evolving since the advent of the internet. Everything is moving a lot faster, and what gets put into formal systems like education never moves at the same pace. An easy example of this is my art mentor, who got me into following art properly and is basically the reason any of you even know who I am. She went to art school. And out of everything that she did in art school and passing all of her classes, I'd say she probably uses less than 50% of everything she did in art school in her current career and interest and trajectory. Because they're not going to teach you in art school about some of the modern things that are going on, but that doesn't take away the things that they do teach you. So she did a lot of sculpting and classical painting and all of that. And sculpting and painting techniques she uses, but classical proportions and color choice, nothing to do with what she does with her life. And there was no way that she was going to have a class in art school about VTuber rigging and live 2D. So, you know, that's just not something that you're going to find there. It's part of why I decided to go with Mark Brunette's art school when I wanted to actually get some artistic training under me, is because that was more geared to what I'm doing and more in keeping with, you know, some of the modern things that are happening. And so I never wanted to go to university to study literature. I think I would have had a terrible time, and I've got the sneaking suspicion that if I'd ever gone to school for literature, I probably would have come out of it hating writing and never wanting to do it again. I hated studying books in mandatory education, certainly didn't want to commit myself to doing it and having to pay, you know, thousands of dollars for the privilege. So I did what I've done with my art, and I went online to start looking at writing tips and tricks, because ultimately stories are for everybody, and that means that everybody's perception, there's something that you can learn from it. And school teaches you to learn, but mostly make connections. Yep, that's very true. My dad's in higher ed. He tries to keep up, but between management and other factors, it's impossible. Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you're doing things that involve computers, for example. Computers advance so quickly. By the time you finish your degree, something new is out that you've never even heard of and wasn't part of your course, but you're going to have to figure out. So, and connections absolutely being an important part, yes. And as I say, the things that you'll learn in school won't be in, you know, without value. I'm absolutely not trying to throw any aspersions on higher education. I just don't feel that the sort of thing that I was looking for, I was going to find in a formalised educational department. So I went online. And in the first couple of months, you know, there were all of these videos of do's and don'ts for writing. If your book has this, then, you know, it will never get picked up, or if your book has that. And you sort of go through a process with the arts and getting people's online opinions. And opinions are like arseholes. Everybody has one, and you don't necessarily need to go near them. So after a few months, I came to the same realization that I've come to with time with visual art. There's usually a kernel of truth in what people are saying, but how it's applied is the bit that you kind of have to figure out for yourself. If you start your book with this sentence, your book won't get published, is probably a correct statement. Go on.
But it was a dark and stormy night. It was.
It was a dark and stormy night can still be a great opening to a book, because you then subvert it, or you then put it into you take the audience expectation and, you know, oh, this is something somebody's quoting, or this is a children's play, or something. You know, you adjust it from the expectation, and that can be a really great introduction. But in terms of that, if you're starting a book with it was a dark and stormy night, is a publisher likely to pick it up? No. And the reason for that isn't because you should never start a book with it was a dark and stormy night. The reason for that is because publishing houses are really struggling with the fact that you can disseminate literature for free online, and they are now completely risk adverse. People don't go into bookstores and purchase novels the way that they used to, and the industry is still very much ingrained in that historical way that literature has been disseminated to the masses, and struggling to keep up and find a new model that works with our new online world, with the idea of vanity publishers and things like Wattpad, an archive of our own existing, and people being willing to put words in front of each other without having to go through editors, or, you know, you've got all these different options. So the 6 big publishing houses are very risk averse in the same way that Hollywood is, and AAA game companies. They want to put out things that work with a formula that they can understand, that they can put in front of their shareholders, and that guarantees a certain degree of success and or write-offable failure, or tax write-offs. So if you're opening a book with a prologue that's a dark and stormy night, it's probably going to make a publisher go, let's not waste our time with this one, but with this one over here that more matches the sort of thing that we're looking at. Archive of our own, in my day it was fanfiction.net, and before that, yes, I remember fanfiction.net. So,
oh boy,
you know, you've got these sort of things that are going on. So the advice of don't open your book with this if you intend to submit it to a publishing house is correct. But the advice of don't ever use this sentence is incorrect. There's some nuance there that needs to be played with. It's the same with, oh, you should never use adverbs because Stephen King does his best to avoid them. Okay, that's great. And for people who love Stephen King's writing, that's great. But what if that's not the audience that you're going for? This piece of advice is useless. You need to have a hook in the first sentence. There's some truth to that, but the ways that hooks work, I mean, that's a topic all its own that I could go on about for an hour as to what makes a good hook and what doesn't and why. And all the times where what doesn't make a good hook I'm actually wrong about, because if it was aimed at this audience or for this purpose, it completely changes everything. Advice is subjective, particularly online. There is some good advice out there. There are some things that are universal. If you adverb, it's going to come across as juvenile writing. On my banner for my stream, my little quote that I have on there is, she breasted boobily down the stairs. We all know why that's bad writing, and you probably shouldn't do that. But if you're writing something comedic, suddenly it's fine. Okay.
That is still a line that makes me chuckle whenever I hear it.
Yes. Part of the problem is that anyone who has success can only really tell you about how they got there, and your path will be different, and anyone who has not succeeded is bullshit. That's very true as well. I've given advice to people on both art and writing, how I've gotten to the position I'm in, some of the trials and tribulations I've been through to get there. And of course that's kind of what this stream is me wittering at you guys about my experience with writing. And I do always couch it in a, well, look, this is what I did for me, but some of that might not be available to you or doesn't work for you. This is a guideline, a lived experience, but that doesn't make it instantly replicable for everybody. I'm incredibly fortunate that by happenstance, Iden asked me, hey, do you think you can draw a hunchback? I did, and that got in front of the right eyes and allowed me to move into the circles that I now move in for me to even be here on this stream in the first place. I've been incredibly fortunate to be with the BPL and having the opportunities that I have to do all of the ridiculous shitposty things that I do and have that, be a positive impact in the world. It makes me incredibly happy. Yes, and Hunch Nuts came from that. You're quite right, Eric.
Hunch Nuts!
Is that something that, my next door neighbor, who's older than I am, has no idea about these things? Is that the art journey she's going to have if she suddenly decides that she wants to do art? No, it's my lived experience is not applicable to what she might be trying to do and what opportunities she has put in front of her. So advice is always subjective. Advice is always subjective. Right, let's see what else you guys have had to say. On the side though, that's how we get works like My Immortal. Yeah, My Immortal is something that really should have only been written between the two girls that were writing it. But damn am I glad that it was put out somewhere where everybody could see it and the interaction of a reading audience could affect how things went. And we ended up with just this, it's either the world's greatest troll fic, at which point my hat's off to the person behind it, whoever they may be, or it's a genuine glimpse into a 14-year-old girl who was displaced in the world, living in Dubai despite being, probably a American or English-speaking person overall, just trying to find her way in the world. And that is a snapshot into the human experience. Is My Immortal good writing? No! Categorically, it's terrible writing. But it has such a fond place in my heart. It genuinely does. My sister is big into fanfics. I have fond memories of helping her write fics on ff.net. One of the big things that's also always worth remembering, I think, is that for most writers, especially coming up through the internet age, the best way to get started is with writing fanfiction. If you're writing about characters that you already know and love, and you're either using them to go through a series of events that you're curious about, or you have a series of events that you want to use a known character to explore, and that's when you often get your characters that no longer act like what they should act like from their original source material. What you're doing there is you're taking building blocks, imitation building blocks from somebody competent to help you understand what you're doing. It's exactly the same as a child using dolls to play house or to play soldiers or whatever. You're taking something that's pre-built that you don't have to put together yourself to explore an idea you have and start immersing yourself in the craft and the understanding, and settle your own brain onto these things. And of course, you have art evolution. The more you do something, the better that you will innately get at it. The amount you get better at it can obviously be vastly sped up with feedback, with education, with better tools, but any person who engages in any creative act will naturally get better at it over time just by engaging with it and the responses that it then generates. So picking up pre-built elements, like, you know, you want to write a story about Master Chief and Cortana going to deal with the problems in Dead Space. You're using a whole series of pre-built elements there, but what you're doing is you're teaching your brain to think about how certain personality types would react to a setting or a series of events that they're not custom designed for. How do you solve the problems there? What does that twist? What does it change? Does it change how Dead Space plays out? Does it change how you write the characters? Does it probably do both? Yes. And from doing that, you learn things. There's a wonderful, wonderful foundation to be found in writing fanfics.
You know what we also learned?
What's that?
That just a quick and easy question can make an entire hour disappear.
Yes, I did say I've got no plan on what I'm doing today, but I'm sure I'll end up ranting about something. Mostly just starting on something is the most important step. 100% agree with that. You see that in the visual arts as well. There is nothing more intimidating than the blank page. If you don't know what to do, if you're not sure where you're going, if you're having a problem, the blank page is your enemy. Write something. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be something that you're going to keep. It doesn't have to be something that you know, marry and write a contract with. Or draw something. You can always change it later. But if you just stare at the blank page and get too into your head and you don't make those strides to go forward, you'll never go anywhere. You have to get rid of the blank page. My Immortal is a beautiful time capsule, absolutely. Writing for Shoal has taught me about how I write. That's wonderful. Then, you know, my job here is done. My stream has done the ultimate thing I hoped it would do, which is encouraging other people to engage with writing and the craft thereof. One can ship of Theseus until it's an original fic. Absolutely. I mean, that's where 50 Shades of Grey came from. Terrible piece of writing, but that's literally where that came from. The Divine Comedy. It's Bible fan fiction. It's Bible fan fiction with a self-insert.
Yeah. Yeah. As well as a rampant series of character assassinations.
Well, yes, because, you know, the person was doing what a lot of writers do, which is writing out their feelings against people who've wronged them. I would be lying if I did not admit that, you know, there are some characters in some of my books who are named after people I've met in my life, even if it's sort of a pseudonym of that person or an alliteration or something. Because writing's a wonderful way to get out your feelings, and that's what we're here for, is the human experience. You need to suck first to get kind of good at something. You need to fail to learn from your mistakes, otherwise you're never going to get it right. Yes, learning to fail is a really important thing. Everybody makes mistakes. It's one of the things that makes learning other languages difficult, is we, as adults, often don't give us the space to get things wrong, whereas when a child babbles or gets a word wrong or says it with a lisp, well, you know, we don't punish them for that. It's the same whenever you're learning anything new. You're allowed to lisp, you're allowed to make slip-ups. The important part is that you learn from them, and that, you know, the people that you're engaging with, whose feedback you take on board, are coming at it from the same place. I have many a sketchbook with my drawings. When I do revisit them, I chuckle at the quality, but love the old vigour. That's a really good way of looking at it, Tired German. A lot of artists hate looking at their old work, and I can always say that by the time I've finished any piece I'm about to deliver, I can already see mistakes in it, but those little things are the things that mean that my next piece will be better, and it's why my very first piece that I did, that any of you guys ever saw, compared to what I'm doing now, I have such a, you know, progression through them, is because you're always trying to move forwards. I've been doing work thanks to Shoal for the dojo in the Orcas. I've been working on a system called New Dawn. Oh, that's wonderful. Help design a That's wonderful. I'm really glad you're working on things. I forget if it was Peanuts or Calvin and Hobbes that said, I've discovered the cure for writer's cramp, writer's block. Yes. Yes. And that's
Yeah, that'll do it.
That is another brief thing I'll talk about before we move over to Shoal proper. When you are doing an artistic thing for money, whether you're doing, commissioned artwork, commissioned writing, whether you're working in video games, whatever it is that you're doing, once you make the decision that you're going to take on a creative job as a job, writer's block doesn't exist because it can't exist. You have a certain duty to the people that are paying you to meet the expectations, and that's not to say that you're never going to get these periods where you really don't feel like doing things, or where your brain feels like it's shutting down, or you can't process something. That's absolutely going to happen. That's very normal. The thing with taking on board a creative job is that you have to learn ways around it and ways to re-engage with your passion and what it is that you've promised and committed to do. That is a skill set all on its own, and that's really what I've been learning over the last 2 years, even more than the technical skills that I've been trying to work on through art school. And Mark Brunette is the person that I go to for a lot of my artistic information. And of course I have my art mentor I talk to regularly. You can't just say, oh, well, I'm really sorry your stuff's going to be late. I have writer's block. That doesn't work. You have to find ways to work around it, and it's been a really interesting and kind of fun journey learning to do that. There have definitely been times where I have not been in the zone to draw, but this week especially has been one of those weeks. Iden and I are gearing up to a huge move that's coming up. There's a lot of factors in the air that are not set in stone, a lot to worry about, and a lot that we need to get done. And when I'm stressed, I just want to turn my brain off. My brain works overtime most of the time as it is. Once I start adding stress in there, I just want to ostrich and stick my head in the sand. I can't do that. I owe people things. I've made promises. I've made commitments. And frankly, that's not good for me. And it has been a wonderful thing to learn how to overcome that, to put things in place to re-engage with my passion when I don't feel like doing it. And blank page syndrome can often be the thing. Although I'm not sitting down to a blank page for the things that I'm currently commissioned to do, getting started, making that first line, making the decision to pick up my tablet, and even if I only colour this one bit, well, once I start, it becomes a lot easier to continue. And I think that's a really worthy skill set for people to develop as well, is when you're in those phases where you're like, I've got writer's block, I don't know where to go from here. That's fine, but sit down and write something, sit down and draw something, and see where you can go from there. And it's okay if you throw away whatever you do on the day that you're having a bad day, because it will help you to do better on the day you're having a good day. Catching the end of this rant, but I'm inspired to pick the pen back up and just spaghetti at wall for my D&D game. That's wonderful. And spaghettis are, just throw things at the wall. You are not obligated to keep any of it. Keep what works, get rid of what doesn't, and you get yourself into a habit as well. Once you're in a routine where every day, I'm going to spend at least 20 minutes drawing, I'm going to spend at least 20 minutes writing. Once you've done that for 3 months, you get to the point where if you have a day where you don't do it, it doesn't feel right and you want to do it. Another piece of advice that I will pass on as my very, very last thing before we really need to move over to Shoal is something I learned from Mark Brunette, who is my art teacher. I have his art school. It's wonderful. I recommend it. I am not sponsored by Mark Brunette, but that is the art school that I've been on. I think it's a wonderful program. And there's something he talks about in his opening lecture to do with being an artist that I think applies to all of the creative arts and probably just to life in general. And one of the things that he said was, it's very easy to get frustrated when you're trying to do a new skill or to do something creative and it isn't going the way that you want it to. And the temptation when you're frustrated is to just get up and walk away and come back to it later. And the problem with that is that what you end up doing is forming a negative association with what it is that you're doing. If you give up when you're at your most frustrated, then the habit that you're forming is, I'm going to keep doing this until I'm too annoyed to continue. And then this becomes something that you don't enjoy. When you're frustrated, it is okay to put things down, but always do something immediately afterwards before you walk away that isn't going to frustrate you. Do a quick little doodle in a margin. Write a sentence from much further through the story, which is the bit that you wish you were writing right now. Pop down there and just write that thought down so that when you get up to walk away, you're walking away on a positive note. You have a positive engagement with your working space, with your creative flow. Never go to bed angry. Go to bed going, well, that didn't work today, but I've done this fun little thing. Everything's all right. I'll come back to it tomorrow. And then tomorrow, your biggest hurdle is just getting started. So you're forming that positive connection. And that is a piece of advice that has genuinely really helped me. I'm always keen to sit down at my tablet. And on days where I'm not keen to sit down because I've got artist block or writer's block, or I'm stressed because of other things going on in my life that have nothing to do with my creative things, I'll sit down, I'll start on something, and when I finish, I'll do something I want to do before I go to bed. And I find that really, really helps. Rail says, my problem right now is this whole talk is super inspiring, but my reason for not working on stuff is having to prioritize moving. So now it's another thing for the list after I've moved. That's completely valid, Rail. Certain things will get in the way, and no amount of inspirational talk is going to fix that. If you get in a car accident and your leg's broken, you can't very well go out and exercise no matter how much you want to. You've got to wait for your leg to get better. If you've got, you're physically moving and you don't have access to the tools that you need, you're going to have to wait. But that said, when you are going through these stressful times, if you have just a notepad and a pencil and you can maybe just jot down a couple of bullet points of things that you want to revisit when you do have time, that's still engaging positively with your creative side and the things that you want to do. If you can't do that, you obviously can't do that, but there is a good reason to make use of the notes apps on your phones, the recording app. If you have a thought, if you have an inspiration, even just making a note of it somewhere can be that positive cycle for later on when you have the ability to write, 5,000 words in a day or whatever it is that you're doing. And if that advice helps anybody, that makes me incredibly happy. Right, it is now 4:10. We need to do some shoal. We need to talk about coral. First things first, though, I did say we were going to look at our wonderful new piece of art from the wonderful Tired German, which he has made us a image of a cephalonid, which should pop up on screen. There it is. So this is our cephalonid based on the written description. I will say that this one looks the most different from what I saw in my head compared to what Tired German has gone on to draw, which doesn't, of course, in any way make it incorrect. And we do know that we're going to have sort of different sub-strains or bloodlines of these different creatures, and different tribes will look differently. But I think this guy's great. It's not how I would have drawn it, and I love that it's so different, but still absolutely matches the description that I wrote. And is, as ever, a wonderful bit of effort from Tired German in engaging with the project that we're doing over here. So I love this guy. I think he's brilliant.
He's all squoobly.
Cephalonid with bling, yes. We do not need humanoid aliens. There's always a degree of useful with humanoid aliens. It's a way of exploring a setting in a way that the audience can understand. But yeah, we're doing underwater mecha nonsense with psionics. We can afford to go quite schwoobly. That's a very good word, Grimos. We will go schwoobly with our aliens. We have our laticals,
gotta be weird,
who are more humanoid-ish, with a very large ish attached to it. So we have lots of ideas of how to do this. I was struggling how to give this guy a pocket for his tools. The fact that you thought about that is just, it genuinely makes me happy. The amount of effort and thought and complexity you guys put into engaging with what was, for those of you who already know and for those of you who don't, Shoal came into existence as an errant thought for a month-long art project I wanted to do that I didn't have time for. And now we're here, where we've got all of these different artworks coming in. We've got thousands of words on this setting. We've gained new scientific understanding as we've gone through it of various things. We've got our orbiting space diagram that Ninja Turtle did for us. It's wonderful, and it genuinely does my heart glad. I'm very appreciative for all of you. So now we need to engage your wonderful, clever, smart brains and love for crabs. I think this week we really need to talk about coral and how our psionics are going to work and what we want people to have access to. So let me move the main thing over to where I've got coral right now. Now, I'm not going to worry about coral in terms of how it's integrated into the mecha right now. What I want to do today is to just make some notes on the coral itself and how it works. And I think the first thing that we need to talk about is how many types of coral are there? And I'm going to make this just one big, there we go, because this is all we're doing right now. And then I can click over to see what chat is saying. Chat is saying, be right back, dog needs walkies. Okay, well, that's it, guys. We've all got to pause. We've got to stop. We've got to wait for Sunshine Temple to come back. We'll carry on then. How many do we need? So that's a good way of approaching the problem. Okay, let's see if I missed anything else in chat. I always try to give my characters clothing, at least one place for them to put their keys, even the not safe for work ones. But keys have got to go somewhere. Maybe a coral for each type of kinesis.
Makes sense. Meanwhile, Pip
has
noise.
opinions. Pip believes that the coral should howl. I disagree. I think that would be very, very loud, my boy, as you are being right now. I think 2, maybe 3. The psychoactive one, a mundane one, and a poisonous one. So in terms of, I'm purely talking about coral with an H. Normal corals will absolutely be a thing, and we're not going to have to go into huge detail on those. Normal corals are normal corals. For our psionically active corals, I was thinking that we would have corals that would be banded by region and by use. So, for example, having coral that only grows in the abyss. Coral that only grows in the shallows. Perhaps we have a freshwater coral that only grows in the freshwater lakes on the 2 land masses. And then by use, I was thinking that some coral would be good for... Okay, Thai German is saying polar as well. Yeah, polar could certainly be one. In terms of thoughts, the sorts of things that I was also thinking about for use is perhaps one type is best for using in locomotive systems and connects with, you know, the pilot the best when it's used there. One type for effectively the Titan's personality and brain function effectively. And then maybe we have another type that is for purely psionic instructive purposes, like an onboard computer that translates different things. These were the sorts of thoughts I was having, and I'm very interested to see what you guys think. So let me scroll up and take notes from chat. Doctor Who thinks we should have 2, maybe 3. Psychoactive, yeah, I clocked that. I think we need 3 types, 1 for mechanical, 1 for people to use, and a 3rd that connects the 2. But in exchange, if used by people without an in-between coral, it will cause damage. Can be used by people, it will just mess with you more. Okay, so you're thinking similarly to how I was. A brain type of coral, a locomotive type of coral, and then a sort of interchange one that allows all of that to come together. Sort of an interface coral. And regional coral. Okay. So let me copy Grimos's message over onto our board so that we have it. Because we've got... That is not what Grimos typed. Excuse you. Let me try just grabbing this bit and see if it will copy it over. Right, there we go. Because we've got plenty of space. We can put as many notes as we want on here. Okay, Eric says, I'd recommend at least 1 choral type for each vocal range. Bass, soprano, alto, etc. And then 1 for each type of instrument. Mecha, construction, etc. Okay, so that would be tying in our theming that we've been using to sort of reinforce what we're doing with our narrative. So let's make a note of that. That's that note added on. We need at least one polar, one deep sea, and one shallow. Okay, we're going to copy that down. That's a very good note to have as well. I'm also struggling to do this because Anka has decided that the best place for her to put her little chin is on my keyboard. So, bear with me. What if humans perceive the music of the coral as the sound of a dog barking? Maybe the strength of the coral depends on depth. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. One of the things we talked about when we made our sort of whale slash shark people was that for where they live, you have the type of coral that's good for Titan personalities, Titan brains is more abundant. And of course the whale people live deeper down. So I think that would tie in really well with what we've already been talking about. So let's pop that in. Yep.
A consideration as far as the differences between what the different songs sound like. And this is one of two shower thoughts that kind of struck me in the week about Shoal as a setting. The first is that we are likely going to have the fascinating reality of having a society, a civilization that discovered the airfoil before they invented the wheel, just by nature of deep sea existence.
It would make a lot more sense.
The thing that I'm thinking of, though, is the deeper you go, the more you're going to rely on things like infrasound to carry and convey any kind of communication or message. So the deeper you go, the deeper the song will be, if you get what I mean. So that at the very depths, it would be to the surface dwellers like just listening to throat singing, whereas the guys who live down in the deeps can't hear diddly squat from the whistles and clicks of the surface dwellers because they don't carry far enough.
Yeah. There's a lot of good thoughts going on here, and it would be really nice if Twitch would let me copy multiple things at once, but it won't. There we go. It would also help if I stop clicking on the wrong things. Okay, so we know we need at least the 3 different types for making our Titans work. Brain, interface, and muscles. I'm going to pop that into Coral and the Mecha for when we write up about that, because I think that's going to work really, really well for that. Okay, a heat or volcanic type of coral that could be useful for moving from the different depths as the heat levels change with the depths. That's certainly a thought. I'm going to really enjoy writing this up this week. I'm hoping to spend my Sunday writing up the notes from today, because I should touch wood be finishing my last commission before the big move tomorrow. Now watch that go completely out of the window. Right, what else have we got in chat? You could name the types after types of singers. A baritone choral is more powerful and less subtle than a soprano, for example. I'm going to attach that note to Eric's thought because I think that's a really good idea, and I do really like that we're reinforcing our theming. Theming in regards to, you know, carrying through the sound thing doesn't have to be the be all and end all, but I think it's really going to give Shoal its unique voice, which will be nice. Makes me think of the Magic School Bus episode. Oh no! Coral in a minor key notes of C sharp. I don't want to get too specific down to individual notes because I don't think the people of Shoal would quantify music the same way that humans do. And I'd like that sort of little barrier between how humans talk about music and how perhaps the Shoaly talk about music to be one of those things that sort of reinforces that this is an alien culture. But I really do like the ideas you guys are bandying about. Brain core you described lends itself to that wonder that we have. Masculine actually developed personality and causes froth. Okay. Why not combine location, timbre, and function, like abyssal, base, brain coral, and the shallow altal structural coral? Yep, I think it's probably going to end up being written up in that sort of way. I will copy that note over so that we've got it here. All right, what else have we got, chat? Seeing different criteria for the discussion here: location, singing tone, and function. What about how they grow? Do they grow in spirals, branches? We can certainly talk about what shapes they come in, and potentially that might come into their function. So I'm going to take that note down, Tired German. I'm probably not going to get too into the weeds discussing it this week, because what I think would be really interesting is to write it up and leave it with me for a week. And then once I've written it up and we have, there's this many types of coral and this is where, sort of the location, the singing tone all comes into it, we can then, as a group, describe what each one should look like. Once we've got that right up so that we're looking at we're talking about this specific type of coral, it does this specific type of stuff, then we can decide what that one should look like. So I am going to write that note down, but I'm probably not going to address it a huge amount this week. So I'm going to put it boop, 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 down there at the bottom. Okay, lower frequencies will travel further. Yes, that's just how liquids work and sound. So yep, absolutely. Music theming is great. One of my favorite RPG series of all time is all music based stuff. Oh, that sounds interesting. What's up? What series are you talking about? I've always thought of Coral Song as something Coral developed to lure fertilizer in, but life on Shoal adapted to it to develop psionics. Absolutely, yes. The Coral Song will have a foundation. It benefits the coral. And while perhaps the very earliest coral used it just to sort of lure in early species around it that could perhaps swim and move and etc., once it gets to the point where it's like, oh, well, we could also lure in small fish to defend us. The coral itself will have evolved along with the life forms that rely on it. I like the deep pinging of the sound range as the coral gets deeper. Yes. And I think that just makes natural sense that that's what will happen. Would the presence of coral affect technological development? No one would build a telecommunications network when you can carry a message by adding it to the song. The thing there that I think would potentially be a problem would be the amount of noise that is perhaps generated. So, I mean, absolutely, this is something to think about. And I'm going to stick this into the technology section because I think that's where that's going to become relevant, and that's something we're hoping to discuss next week as well. But you are right. When you've got these other things that are available and communication works very differently underwater to above water, how does that affect how people communicate and how they pass things along? All right. Something that may help. Categorizing effect is important. For instance, most of my stuff categorizes magic into space, time, matter, focus, mind, and spirit. Yeah, and I think we'll derive a lot of that from what we're discussing today. Coral was a predator that became a symbiotic organism. Yeah, very much so. In some cases, certainly so. I'm wondering what Shoaly children's TV would be like. You are fine to be off in left field. That's all going to be cultural stuff we get to in the coming weeks, which I'm trying to get to the culture because so many of you are interested in these sort of cultural elements, and there's a lot to be talked about there. The brain coral comes in different vocal ranges. I like this. The different ranges have different uses, like you described. Perhaps soprano is the melody of the mech, the personality. That's an interesting thought, yep. And I don't think we're going to be sort of hard set into this one thing must always sound this one way. I think there's going to be a range within certain things. It's not going to be just the same tones every single time or the exact same choral every single time. There will be a little bit of nuance into it, but things are going to be within brackets. I think will make the most sense. All right, let's pop that thought down so that gets addressed as well. Shoaly languages roughly translate to musical keys. The Stratenoids speak C sharp, while the Whalefolk speak A major. I certainly think that the areas that the different species are in, if they use a audible language, that will certainly be the case. But I think we're probably going to have to, when we start talking about culture and languages, for some species, I think that the visual element of communication might be far more important than it is even for humans. Especially for our surface-dwelling creatures that can perhaps have access to light and see things. Expressions and use of limbs to indicate things probably going to factor into that. Perhaps as well, you know, when you're agitated, if somebody's agitated and flailing their limbs, that changes how the water is moving. So perhaps that has an effect on
Here's
how
one.
people detect emotion. Yep.
You know, the water tremors being body language, I like the idea of, but electromagnetics.
Yep. And of course, we have the psionics to play with as well, which is our unique thing that we're going to be dealing with. Another thought just got popped that I want to stick into the technology section for now. Okay, and then back to the coral itself. All right. Personality AI of the mech is called its chorus. It's made up of multiple types of coral. That could be pretty cool. Yeah, that could be pretty cool. Brains are very complex, and if we're going to make that sort of thing work for a mech and give it a proper personality, then yeah, it taking more than just only one coral for more complex thought would be really interesting. And of course, maybe that's one of the things that is the difference between our more functional mechs that are just there to perhaps be used to do harvesting or agriculture work. Doesn't need a complex personality. It's cheaper to produce because it's only got perhaps one type of brain coral, and it has a rather simplistic personality versus your, let's say, warrior mechs. If we decide we need those, they're going to need to have potentially much more complex personalities, and maybe that comes from needing to have multiple types of coral built in to be able to have that ability to process and adapt to those kinds of thoughts. I would love seeing abyssal spiral corals to try and gather nutrition from the area around it. Yes. I'm going to put that down with this bottom note because that will be stuff to go into more depth next week, but I do like that idea a lot. Maybe categorized by region, depth, tone, function, structure, and rarity. That would be a good classification system for when this is fully written up. I really like that, yes. I'm going to make that bold. It might get tweaked a bit as the write-up happens, but that's a really cool idea. I haven't been in the Orcs channel much. You should definitely pop over to the Orcs channel. We have fun over there, and there's usually something going on every day or two as somebody has an errant thought. I very much enjoy the Shoal channel over in the Orcs. The coral are a siren song. I was just curious because we need to remember coral is a living organism that sings the chorus for itself. We still need to apply at least the question of food and fecundity to them as well. Yes, these are a living species. And although we do have this symbiosis, that doesn't mean that all of the effort only comes from one side. So let me put that at the top as something to keep in mind when I do the write-up. Psi noise would play into our environmental themes nicely. Yep. Do you have scat jazz coral? Corbin! Probably. Would the Shoalie have started cultivating coral? Absolutely. I can't think of a single good reason why that wouldn't have been a natural evolution. If you're dependent on something, especially if you're looking to exploit it for use in more advanced technology, having access to more of it when it's a growing thing, I mean, it's how we are with food crops that we need. So absolutely, coral is going to be a farmed commodity, and farming some perhaps is easier, and for other types it's harder, and that will play into our rarity scale. The vocal range that is the strongest perhaps affects the personality. That could be a good idea. Yep, let me pop that in here. There we go, that's in the right section to pull from when the write-up happens. When dealing with living things, variation will be expected. Absolutely. Bioluminescent communication for things in the deep. Yes, bioluminescence is definitely going to come into it. We've already, in our animal species, made heavy use of bioluminescence, so I think that absolutely needs to carry through into our language concerns when we get there, and that will of course adjust some of the write-ups we've done already with deciding which of our races have bioluminescence, or whether they perhaps adorn themselves with bioluminescent creatures, and that's something that could perhaps happen. That will be a very interesting conversation to have when we get to culture. Deep sea creatures have bioluminescence. Yep. They are an RPG with technology-based song magic. Oh, that's really... I've never heard of that, Was Up. That sounds really interesting. Vocal range composing the chorus determines the next personality. Yep, that is a cool idea. I do like that. Okay. Thank you for dropping the Discord link, Tired German. We're almost heading towards culture minds made out of coral with the personalities in the mix picked to match their purpose. I think that's where it will start with the construction, Wilf. In terms of just what we've discussed in all the weeks prior to this. I feel like when the Shoalie are building a Titan, they know its purpose, they know what it will need to be successful in that purpose, they will make the decisions of the corals and the materials that are needed to successfully make a Titan, and then as pilots are picked for it, particularly with the more complex mecha, and you're picking your pilots to sort of match, what it is that you want them to do, and of course that's going to feed into their personalities as well, because we did say that as Titans have multiple pilots over time, their personalities are influenced by these pilots that they bond with, because I think that's going to be the nature of our psionics. So, yeah, culture minds are certainly going to be there, but I don't think it's going to be purely only ever the coral types that... I don't think it's going to be a scientific equation. If you have X amount of one coral, X amount of another type of coral, and Y amount of the third type of coral, you're definitely going to get this personality. There's always going to be that nuance in it, but yeah, you are right with what you're picking out there, and that's very much sort of where my mind has been with where we've been taking this to. Benny's coral should be an extinct type. Wouldn't make too much sense if modern Shoalie could succeed in making more. Either that, or because Benny is the age that he is, and this particular hermit crab is just the type that it is, maybe there's some unique connection there. Because we have said that despite attempts to do so, there is only one Benny. There is only one Benny. How aware is coral? Does coral naturally think? I don't think coral thinks on the same level that we do. I don't feel like it's going to be as sapient as we are, but not that a degree of sapience is perhaps not there. I feel like it's going to have just sort of this background, I don't want to say godly or anything like that, but that it has a sort of very sleepy conscious awareness of the world. Coral makes a song to its own tune and is happy with what it's being used for, but I feel like it would have us almost sort of very stunted childlike intelligence, if it has an intelligence at all. I don't think it's going to have the ability to be deliberately manipulative, but that usefulness is usefulness, and there are certain things that perhaps catch its attention, which will be a really interesting thing to explore with the concept of space travel, early space travel being where we're at with our setting. The coral just wants to go out and know that the universe is bigger than itself. Used in development in the Furin mech and very, very rare, maybe even extinct. Okay, we could look at maybe the Benny mech having something unique in its brain coral. If that's something you guys want to go with. Maybe we'll do that as a poll before we wrap up today.
Something unique in its brain coral. Shenanigans.
There's the moral question of harvesting sentient or near sapient coral. Yeah, and I don't think that it's going to have... The Shoalie are going to have the same sort of moral and ethics conundrums that perhaps we do. Because if you do have psionics, and we know the coral is psionic, if it's not screaming out in protest, do the Shoalie take that as a degree of consent? So we have options there. Coral singers can sing coral into different shapes, tones, and ranges. Though it should be able to make a bass. It shouldn't be able to make a bass into a soprano, or did you mean should? Just like things change in key. Yeah, I think when we get to the technology section and we discuss how the Shoalie warp coral into the shapes that they need it, maybe we discuss that in depth there. I think most coral can think, but isn't sentient. I think the sentience comes from reflecting the minds of the pilot. It's a complex chorus of different bits. Yeah, we're going to be closer to that level, I think. low-level intelligence until sung into shape. Yes, and having that access to a psionic higher sapient pilot that also helps the coral to take the shape of what conscious thought should be like. My idea of how the coral think is like how mushrooms in a forest can think. Just a lot more obvious with actual tones. Yes, yeah, we're sort of looking at that very, very foundational intelligence level as it has it at all. Okay. Do people consume the coral in any way? Are some types food or other consumables? I have a feeling that we want to avoid that. We have talked about froth and overexposure to coral or lack of exposure to coral causing mental conditions. I feel like ingesting coral could potentially be a problem. But the accessing coral through the food web is just naturally how psionics work. And it's also why the pearl thing that we were talking about was so interesting, that you can use, consumption of pearls to boost your psionic resonance, but that comes with its downsides, pearls being a drug. Aiden is giving me an observation. Give me just a moment. We do consume a lot of things for aphrodisiacs. So yeah, but I'm not thinking of it as being like the corn of the Shoaly world.
I'm saying that having it as not a staple thing for consumption, but something that is kind of on the fringes makes sense.
Aiden is saying some fringe things that people perhaps eat might be something that we want to go with. Okay. Attempts to replicate Benny inevitably have wild, unpredictable, and possibly cataclysmic results. Yes, or might just summon Benny, who puts an end to this shenanigan, because it's not a Benny-induced shenanigan. If natural coral are one thing and coral singers are what make it do different things, that could mean that if a coral singer dies, their exact shape dies with them. A trainee could learn their master's craft, but two people making the exact same shape would be near impossible. That's an interesting thought. Let me copy that down. Helps if I click on the right program to copy that into.
How would that affect mass production and industry?
Yeah, that was the thought I was going to come to. That could affect mass production and industry, but it's certainly something to think about. And once I do the write-up based on all of the ideas we're putting out today, of course it's something I'll read next week, and you guys can tell me what you like, what you don't like, what you think should be changed, any additional thoughts that need to go in. And that's definitely something I'll keep in mind while I'm doing the write-up. Benny's coral is like Dr. Jekyll's formula, some impurity that made it work the once but has never shown up again. That tracks thinking takes a lot of energy. It does. It does. It has no mobility or real means to affect the world around it, so is it more introspective? Yes, I think that's a really good word to use, Bully Snake. It's pretty introspective and probably enjoys living vicariously through the species that use it to make it more mobile. Makes a sentient coral is aware but doesn't think. That's a good way of putting it, yep. The thing is, the shape doesn't need to be 100% identical. Think of it like bands playing music. As long as they have the same sheet music and instruments, they're able to make the same music. Yeah, but everybody perhaps potentially puts their own strains on it. Flutes come in different varieties, but you do also have, flutes. If you pick up one flute and then the next flute, the musician can still play the same song on two different flutes as long as they're built the same. So it's definitely going to be something to think about. Time means little to a sedentary coral, so its thoughts move slower. Yes! Could coral work sort of like the flood? They don't develop intelligence until they reach a certain mass. Certainly, I think how much coral, of a coral is in an area, how big it's become, is certainly going to affect its song, its presence, and its effect in the song. So certainly that's going to be a thing. And being bonded with an already intelligent being is certainly going to allow the brains that we make for the Titans to do what they do. Not mass-based, complexity-based. Okay. I think complexity and mass might be sort of two things that also can at some points work hand in hand. Depending on the shape that a coral takes could, predetermine how much mass it can even get to before it would naturally break in the currents that we have on Shoal. So it's probably going to be somewhere between the two. To old growth wonder that caused froth, I think we talked about earlier. Yeah, old growth having different opinions to younger coral will be very interesting. Okay. Coral can think, so more coral means more thinking, faster, more complex through processes. I mean, that could be the way that we go with the brain corals. Is one of the purposes of having multiple different coral types is you're effectively giving it, you know, more processors. You're running a 8-core processor by having 8 coral types, so that's why it has the ability to do more thinking types, whereas with your more foundational mecha that are much more simplistic and they've only got perhaps the one coral type, maybe that is what's going on there, is you've only got the one processor, but that's really all you need. Aloysius makes the very, very inspirational message of ah. Thank you. Which is, yes, Aloysius came to see us. Oh, good, the humans that are going to try and eat everything and get into trouble. Yes, humans eating things on Shoal is just going to be its own list of interesting ways to die. Lictor's also here. Lovely to see you, Lictor. Benny shenanigans will be hilarious. Yes, I am very much looking forward to Acts of Benny. I'd love to get the setting into a position where perhaps in November, instead of doing sort of a full writing thing that I was originally envisioning, because we won't have gone through, you know, how to construct a narrative as yet, because I want to get the Shoal setting built before we do that. We're going to communally write a book, chat. Eventually, because this stream seems to be going well, we're going to write a book. And that's going to be a time. But perhaps this November for Writing Month, perhaps we write some short stories of Acts of Benny and see what you guys can come up with everything we will have created by that point. We do not speak the name of the last people who tried to make new Benny. What are we doing today? We are, in fact, talking about the coral. That's a good point. Does coral encourage itself to be built into a mech because that gives it mobility to spread its spores further? I think coral would be on board with being a mech. We're not looking to have a sort of grim dark and go into those subtle elements of the human condition that are very negative. I think we're looking for a very sort of investigative and adventurous setting. So yeah, I think the coral's on board with being mecha. I think it finds it interesting. Ancient coral equals big, smart new coral, complex and smart. Potentially, that could be one way that we look at it. Humans doing anything is a massive warning for other species. Yes. I've had a horrible thought. Human eats coral. The body, if left in the same area as the coral, makes a new predatory coral. Oh God. Coral springing up from human corpses is a terrifying idea. Elder coral yells at younger coral for playing on its lawn. I already have a basic idea in adventure. We might have some TTRPG for it. I would love if we get this setting built into a, you know, complex, comprehensive, understandable setting that maybe at some point we will sit down and turn it into an actual TTRPG with rules and everything. That would be really cool. If you guys are as invested in this as you seem to be, I'm happy for this project to go on for however many years it needs to go into as many different types of media and project as we want it to, because I'm having a lot of fun with you guys, and there's almost 60 of you here right now, and what the hell, thank you. Asking for my art after I finish the Bear Hermit. What does coral look like? That's something I think we're going to talk about, certain corals having certain looks next week. But if you want to come up with some ideas for different corals, any of you, and stick them into Shoal chat for us to look at next week, I'd love to do that. I left out the pun. I'm sorry, Samurai. I'm allergic to puns, so sometimes I skip over them. Oh, God, I hate puns. I never make puns. How dare you, Aiden? I think the coral would just kind of see mecha as a moving reef. Yes. Yes. And I do think we need to make sure that our mecha have, you know, sort of external coral growth. Because I think it's important for the coral to have access to the current and the waves. Now, at some point, we're going to talk about potentially, you know, land-based mecha and potentially mechs that go into space, and we're going to have some interesting conversations when we get to that, because do they need to go into the water periodically for the sake of their coral? Do we come up with other systems for that? That's going to be an interesting conversation when we get to it, but we don't need to worry about it today. I'm imagining something that looks like earth coral but more crystalline. We could certainly go with that in some ways, yes. And maybe some coral look very much like coral without an H because they're camouflaging themselves. I poked into the Orcs' Shoal thread and realised Eric uses the same profile image I did when I first joined the Orcs. That's excellent. A new hand indeed touches the beacon. Okay. Aloe has fled. We've dropped a few people because I said there was almost 60 people here. It's okay. You don't have to run away. I appreciate all of you. I want predator corals that hunt sapients that harm the coral. That's a really, really interesting idea. I certainly want us to introduce some coral elements that are negative. We know that we're going to have some, illnesses that can be caused by coral exposure or lack of coral exposure. The idea of there being things that specifically hunt mechs for their coral would be interesting. And, of course, things that... for coral that perhaps doesn't want to be harvested, or creatures that have grown up to protect the coral predating sapients making use of coral that obviously can't tell the difference between a triggerfish trying to eat the coral and a sapient harvesting it. That's definitely things that we should have. Oh, Lictor is threatening to whip things up. Please do. The Pharaoh Fuzz is still the cutest thing we have on Shoal. I'm going to put Benny back up at the end of the stream. So yes, Lictor, you weren't here for the beginning of the stream to see Benny. I do have a rough sketch of our first Titan, our first mech. I will put it up as we close the stream out in a few minutes. And you can let me know what you think of it, Lictor. Give you permission to use my RPG system modified for Shoal. Rail, if you want to collaborate on that when we get to that point, and if depending on time scales and availability, if you want to get on stream and be part of that, that would be really, really cool. I am totally down for that when we get there, and for people having engagement in this. Friday world building streams. We get more done in 1 hour than Parallax gets done all Thursday night. Don't tell him anyone said that. Don't tell him. Okay. Am I just about caught up on chat, or have you guys been just going nuts? Humans that pilot Titans effectively become rabbit. Right, so yes, this brings up something that Ed has been doing that I haven't touched on yet that we definitely need to touch on. I mentioned last week that Ed was going to look at working on a Google Doc to do with humans in the Shoal setting, which he has done, and it's very thoughts onto paper. None of it is set in stone, but it is a dedicated document purely about that aspect of Shoal that you guys can go and comment on. I'm going to drop the link in the Orcs once this stream closes out. It talks about humans, Ed's thoughts on how they should work in setting, author notes for how to utilize them well in setting, how exposure to psionics will affect humans, and there's a lot of really good thoughts in there. I did have a chance to look it over before stream today, as I said that I would. Ed's got a lot of excellent thoughts in there, and you guys having a dedicated place to go and make comments on his writing so that we can, adjust that as we go. And by we, Ed is taking the lead on this at the minute, and being incredibly helpful in that aspect. I will drop it into the Orcs after this. Very keen to see what you guys think. But yeah, humans cannot natively pilot Titans the way that the Shoal do, which is not to say we can never have a story that looks into that, and perhaps have a story with somebody who perhaps for some reason doesn't have those problems. That could be interesting to explore. I really like the work Ed has been doing, thinking about humans in the setting, how the setting affects humans and vice versa. Definitely encourage you guys to pop over there and take a look at it. I will drop the links after this stream. You will find it over in the auxiliary. Derelict mech parks we spoke of last week, where Benny was born. Would they be a way of growing new reefs? Old mechs form the backbone for coral to grow on. Potentially, when we get to talking about technology, that's definitely something that we're going to have to talk about. With Benny, we know that that was certainly the case when he came to be, because the Shoal hadn't decided yet how they wanted to dispose of defunct Titans, because Benny is a very early Titan. Maybe that's something that there's still a case, is that there are these extinct titan beds, effectively, that become new reefs, or maybe the people have come up with a new way of handling it. That's something we could discuss when we get to that section. Okay, what else have we got? Killing in the name of samurai! Coral getting by a human and being cordyceps equivalents and piloting the human like a weekend at Bernie's. Oh, God! When we get to the point I can help convert the settings to TTRPG. I've helped create a few and I'm creating my own now. Yeah, I'm all down for that being as community member driven as this has been so far. It will be very interesting when we get to that point. Insinuates they aren't just mechs, they're biomechs. There's certainly a biomech element to this, and we know that we have biological technology is going to be quite advanced for the Shoalie. We've looked at that with the manta ray transports already, so there's definitely going to be that element in play here. What if they pair up with a Shoalie native as an intermediary? Are we making Pacific Rim on Shoal? The humans will absolutely try to fix that and harness CTIS. CTIS being a acronym for one of the conditions that humans encounter with psionics. Ed's work, as I say, is fantastic. The absence, doldrums, and dema are predatory types of silence that propagate and absolutely murder the shout and noise of Shoal, a sort of mech-ruining disease that silences the mech coral shout. That's a really interesting idea, Lichter. That is a really interesting idea. I will copy that in. Yeah, psionic EMP, as Aiden's just detailed it. With mecha being basically moving reefs, would the old mecha just be seedbed to the next generation of mecha? Potentially. Absolutely, when we get to fleshing that out, that could be interesting. Ed likes the Pacific Rim idea. You know, maybe that's the newest type of thing that the people of Shoal and the people of Earth are collaborating on, is that this concept of maybe expanding a Titan's sentience by having that exposure to multiple pilots at once. Perhaps that hasn't worked in the past if the Shoal people have decided, the Shoalie have tried it. Maybe that's different with humans, and that gives us another way that humans and Shoalai that have a relationship that's not a purely antagonistic one. One thing that I was going to bring up with you at some point, Ed, as well, is of course we know that psionics makes Shoal really interesting to humanity. One of the other things that will be really interesting to humanity, of course, is how much of Shoal's biology has adapted to handle radiation, which will make for interesting cancer cures for humanity. I imagine that the export of the authority goat to Earth for study has been quite extensive because they have the authority gland and are the most studied species with that. For cancer research, there's going to be a lot of biological interest there. Absence is mutated algae that causes biosphere collapse, where the coral is a cornerstone, making the idea of silence itself into being inimical of life in local cultures. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Gotta be careful with that Lichter bloke. He's dangerously intelligent, you know. A human showed a Shoalie mecha anime. Oh my god. The idea of Shoalie children sitting down to watch Gundam and being very confused. I think it's the current card, but I wager there's still a lot of older machines than those ones. You could have lineages of coral colonies that have served as mecha internals for multiple mecha generations, and maybe that makes them better for it. That's a really interesting idea. Let me copy that down. We are running towards the end of our slot, however, so we are going to need to begin to bring the conversation to an end, and I will look at all of this. What is your end to the conversation? Oh, Aiden's going to give you guys PupCam in just a minute. But it's going to be via phone, so this could be interesting. You'll have to bear with us while we try to sort it out. Okay. So it's to other names of the Rhymefrost being the Forbidden God. Yeah, please do, Eric. At some point, if you want to do a Google Doc with all of the lore stuff that you've done so far, all of the Mythologica, that could be really helpful as well, because you've done so much work. Yes, we must show the people of Shoal Gurren Lagann. Absolutely, they need to see Gurren Lagann. Okay, little coral children sitting down to watch sashimi stream. I hate you, Samurai. Get out. Oh god, Shoaly furries will try to dress as humans. All right, everything we're going on here is all culture stuff. That's going to be for next week. I'm going to take everything you guys have given me. Sunday, I'm hoping to sit down with it, start doing some writing. I'm going to link things in the orcs once this stream is over. You guys have been amazing, as ever, with some of these ideas. A lot of things I wouldn't have thought of. The write-up we will look at next week, and we will figure out where we want to go from there. What you guys agree with, what you don't. Aiden is telling me PupCam is up, so give me just a moment to tinker with OBS and see if I can convince certain things to work. So let's turn the concept of PupCam back on, and then I'm going to head over to the Legion. I'm going to grab this as a pop-out, which, if everything goes right, should just instantly work in OBS. And it looks like it does. So you guys have Pip, and who's that underneath him? Is that Lou? Oh, they're both underneath him. But here you go, chat. A little bit of PupCam to finish out. And I can make PupCam bigger. Give me just a moment. Grab PupCam. Make it bigger. There we go. And now we have woo-woos to go with it. Double doggo all the way. Swarm, yes. Ceres with the babies. Oh, yep, just an average afternoon in the Desir household, with the beagles making their way steadily to the kitchen. Are you hungry, little girl? You want food? Would you maybe throw down some biscuits? And then I'm going to put Benny up on screen, and we're going to get out of here. Because I would love to hear what Lictor thinks of Benny, our first Titan. How is Virgil doing at his new home? He is doing brilliantly. The word from his new owner is that he is settling into their routines brilliantly, and he has become the dad's personal sidekick. So he's doing brilliantly. We've had many pets redeemed, so if you would start petting some puppies. They are very soft. Yeah, Virgil's doing brilliantly. I could not be happier for him. And for those of you who weren't here at the beginning of stream, Lupa is going to her new home not this Sunday, but next Sunday. She's heading to the ranch in Texas, and she's going to go on an aeroplane, which is very exciting. So we are coming to the end of our time with both of the girls. We'll just have the one. You have been informed to stop showing feet on stream for free. And there is little girl. Okay, I'm going to turn PupCam off. I'm going to turn Benny on. So there goes PupCam, and there is Benny. So Benny was, of course, the mech we designed last week, a memorial for our departed Orcslandian friend of the same name, who is here for shenanigans. This is still just the rough sketch for anyone who didn't see him at the beginning. We are going to draw some coral on him that's enjoying the current. We think we might perhaps need a little crab rave on the top. We're not sure yet. And perhaps Benny the hermit crab needs to be on his claw, just posing for a picture. But this is our very, very, very first Titan mech on Shoal that we've drawn. Of course the babies like Zook. The Hail Coralgonia. I might have to put that on his casing. So yeah, we did manage to draw Benny this week, which is wonderful. Seeing the mech makes the design solidify in my head. Wonderful, wonderful. This is still very rough. Some of it's got proper line art Lictor, but a lot of it doesn't. There's a lot still to do here. So I will continue working on him when I have free time. We do have the big move coming up, so, you know, everything is time dependent. Benny running a DJ station. All right, so we are just a little bit over when my slot is supposed to finish. However, Tex and Depp will not be joining us until hour, to the best of my knowledge. I haven't heard anything this week, so I believe that they will be here to entertain you guys through into the start of your weekend. Thank you very much for starting it with me and some writing ranting. I will, of course, be back on Sunday running admin for Slam Hala, so I will put up the Slam Hala advert in just a moment before I get out of here. I do hope to see as many of you as possible on Sunday night. WBPLW is always a good time with the lovely Halzakar and Crow and Fuzzy. And yeah, I will see you at Weekend's End. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. Be good to each other. And yeah, I will see you next time.